All right, here we are for another biology video. As you can see, this one's about cellular respiration as part of the carbon cycle. So we are in the middle of discussing what's going on inside of our bottle cartons. And we came across a question or an idea that the plants are taking in carbon dioxide as part of photosynthesis. But if they just keep taking in the carbon dioxide, eventually the carbon dioxide will run out. And so we need a way to get more carbon dioxide back. And we were introduced to this idea of cellular respiration, that animals are going to eat the plants and then reverse the process and give off carbon dioxide, which can then go back into the plant, can then go back into the animal, into this cycle, right? And that's called the carbon cycle. So in this video, we want to talk a little bit more about cellular respiration because it is a very important thing that happens. It's happening inside of your body right now. And so let's just look at some more details about this. Now, glucose is the star of the show, right? Glucose is the most important molecule, maybe, in your life because this is what all cells run on, right? The main fuel for your body is glucose. Of course, it's made by photosynthesis by taking 6 carbon and 6 oxygen atoms and combining them with 12 hydrogen atoms, although it doesn't actually, it's not actually that simple. But we don't need to go into all of that detail. That's the formula, C6H12O6. You've seen it a few times already. You will see it a few times more. Just to remind you that those letters, like C, stands for carbon, which is part of the periodic table. And then we have our oxygen here, and hydrogen's way over there. There are a couple of other atoms that we come across, like nitrogen, but we aren't going to talk about that one today. So in any case, the energy from the sunlight is stored in the bonds, which are these lines that are connecting the atoms, right? All these atoms are connected, and those are called chemical bonds. And so when the plant or the algae, the producer, makes the glucose, the energy from the sunlight gets stored into those bonds. And so our job now is to break those bonds, right? And that will release the energy. So you might have heard before that we burn our food, right? And that word burn is maybe interesting to you because burning is also known as combustion, right? Over here on the right-hand side, we have something called the fire triangle, that if you have oxygen, heat, and fuel, then you could have fire. There is a formula for this. This is called a chemical formula, where we take some sort of fuel and we mix it with oxygen, and that will produce water, carbon dioxide, and energy. Now, we do need, I'm not ready for that yet, I guess, but I'll go for it. You might be surprised that water is part of this, that when you burn things, water comes out, because a lot of times people think, well, water is going to make fire go away. But a lot of the smoke and, in fact, the flames of the fire that you see are from superheated water molecules that are floating up out of the log or whatever it is that you're burning. And so maybe this picture is from the movie The Martian. And if you've seen it or read the book, you know that in the movie, Matt Damon needs to grow some potatoes on Mars, which is a hard thing to do. And he needs water, and he doesn't know where he can get a whole bunch of extra water. But then he realizes that there's an easy way to get water, and that's to burn stuff. So he sets up this crazy contraption over in here where he puts actually some molecular hydrogen and combines it with oxygen to make water, because water is H2O. And so he takes some H's and some O's and he burns them together. And the resulting water fills up the room. He's got this plastic barriers that catch and the humidity to make it all nice and moist inside of his little greenhouse that he makes on Mars in the movie. So in any case, what I was going to say is that one thing that is interesting about combustion is that you need heat to get it started, right? Like, that's the trick of fire, is that sometimes you need fire to make fire. But how does this relate to our food? Cellular respiration is also the same pattern as combustion. And the fuel this time is glucose, but we're going to combine the glucose with oxygen, and we're going to produce water and carbon dioxide and energy, just like if we were making a fire. Now, again, this doesn't really want to happen inside of your body. So you need these special things called enzymes that we will talk about later in the year, but you need special chemicals in your body to make cellular respiration happen. While I was talking, this more scientific chemical formula showed up here. Again, this one is the glucose, and then the other ones hopefully you recognize as oxygen, water, CO2. There is a molecule here that we haven't gotten a whole lot of chance to talk about called ATP, which stands for a longer chemical name called adenosine triphosphate. You don't need to know that, which is why it's not on the screen. But ATP is the energy molecule that living things need. And so this is actually the goal of cellular respiration, is to make a whole lot of these molecules, which you can then use to run all the other chemistry that happens in your body. But we're not quite ready for that, because we still want to talk a little bit about these bonds, right? And so here are the chemical structural formulas. These are pictures of the molecules of glucose here, and then this is oxygen, O2, and then you have CO2 and H2O over on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, these are called reactants because they react together. And so what's going to happen is that the reactants are going to get taken apart, and the products will be made from those same reactants. And so the glucose has 6 carbons in it, and we're going to take those to use as the central part of the 6 carbon dioxides that are made. There's some water left over in the, or not water, there's oxygen left over in the glucose, so there's part of the CO2. Now we need some more oxygens, and those could come from the water. Again, I said water, but I meant oxygen. Now, there is some water left, which is where I was going. There's a bunch of O's still yet to be used, and all these H's, which are hydrogens. And as you can see, again, that the process of cellular respiration is going to rearrange the atoms, and in the process, a bunch of energy will come out. The energy comes out because the glucose and the oxygen have a lot of energy. The reactants over here have a lot of energy stored in their bonds. But then the carbon dioxide and the water have very low energy. Water and carbon dioxide are 2 of the least reactive things out there. They don't do a whole lot. Obviously, water is important, but water doesn't really combine with other things very much. And CO2 doesn't combine with things very much either. So in the end, the difference between this is called the energy, right? This arrow is trying to show you this is how much energy is released. That energy is going to get used to make ATP, but there is also a bunch that's lost as heat. This is the primary source of where the heat inside of your warm-blooded body comes from, is by burning our food to release all this energy. Now, it is called burning, but you don't burst into flames, hopefully. There's never been a confirmed case of spontaneous combustion. But the thing is that if you were to literally take your glucose and directly combine it with oxygen, it would make a flame. It would make a very big release of energy, and this would be bad. So this picture that showed up, that's like taking this diver and just jumping straight off the cliff. And when he jumps off the cliff, he's going to make this big splash, right? Because all of the energy that is stored in the diver's body from being up on the platform is going to get released all at once. And that's going to make a big splash. We don't want a big splash. We don't want to release all the glucose's energy right away because we don't want to burst into flames or die from just getting too hot. Instead, we're going to take the glucose and we're going to walk down the steps, one little bit at a time, in a bunch of series of reactions so that we can control the release of energy and not explode as we burn our food. To do this, we need a special part of a cell called a mitochondria. Somehow or another, this has become some sort of meme that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. When I was your age, it was just a convenient way to remember that the mitochondria is where all this stuff happens. One reason to show this diagram is that here's the animal cell, and it has mitochondria in it. But here's also the plant cell, and the plant cell has mitochondria also. This is a very common misconception that plants don't perform cellular respiration. But if you remember, when the plants are doing photosynthesis, They are making the sugar, the glucose, for themselves so that they can use that at some point. And they use their sugar in the same exact way that we use our sugar, through cellular respiration. This is the overview of cellular respiration. You aren't going to have to know too much about this, but it is helpful to see how the parts work. There's several steps where we're going to take our glucose, which has 6 carbons, and we're going to split it in half. And in that process, we'll get a little bit of energy. Then we're going to take these 2 pieces, because there's now 2 pieces, we split it in half, and that's going to go through this crazy process called the Krebs cycle, which you don't need to know anything about. I will show you a picture of it. But during that process, we're going to take off all the CO2s. We're going to separate all these black spheres that represent the carbons and release them. And in that process, we're going to steal a whole bunch of electrons. Electrons are part of atoms, and we're going to use those electrons to make a whole bunch of ATP. This is the payoff. The short answer to this, again, is that the whole point of eating is to take electrons from your food and then feed them into this thing called the electron transport chain, which we'll see in a second here. So respiration, here's the first 2 steps. The part here is called glycolysis, and that's the first part where you take the glucose apart. And then on the right here is this is the Krebs cycle. You can see the Krebs cycle gets very crazy. But the whole point is that we have lots of steps. Each arrow is 1 step. So there's a step, and then a second step, and then another step, and then another step, and then another step. There's actually a bunch of steps inside of these steps, but again, you don't want to get too overwhelmed. The biggest thing to know is that during this process, we are slowly taking away the sugar, right? There are 3 places during these steps where a carbon dioxide is going to be removed. We started with 3 carbons, and there's 1, 2, 3 of them being taken away, right? During that process, we're going to take a bunch of electrons. That's what these molecules are. You definitely don't need to know about these, but on the diagrams that you might see are these the names of these chemicals, which have a weird name, NAD or NADH. And all it means is that when this molecule comes in, and it's going to take electrons, and that's going to make the carbon dioxide fall off. And those electrons, we're going to gather these electrons, and we're going to use them as we go along. Let's see here. So the electrons get given to, we don't need that part anymore, oxygen. This is the reason why you breathe. The number 1 reason why oxygen is important is that we have to drop off these electrons. Notice here's those molecules that I just pointed out, right? We filled them up. They're like transport trucks. And then we drop off the electron, and the electrons get passed through this chain. And at the end of this chain is oxygen. The oxygen's waiting to take in the electrons. And when they takes in the electrons, it makes water. Now, this is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, we actually steal electrons from water and give them to the carbon dioxide to make glucose. This is the exact opposite situation. Oops, I don't want to do that just yet, right? And so the reason that you breathe is to get oxygens to take electrons. If you don't breathe in oxygen, then that makes it very hard to make all this energy, because the point of taking the electrons is to push these little hydrogen molecules around. And the hydrogens, once they get stuck in this little spot, they want to get out of there. And there's only one way out, and that's through this enzyme called ATP synthase. And a lot of this, again, is a little bit beyond what you would need to know, say, on a test. But this is the magic, if you will, of how life happens. That this little spinning molecule is like a windmill, and when it spins, it makes energy molecules called ATP. And the only way it spins is if you use these hydrogens to flow through it. They're like the wind. And the only way to get the hydrogens is to get electrons. And the only way to get electrons is to eat food and steal the electrons from your food, right? So this is the main goal of what's happening. Again, this is the more molecular biology of what's happening. For you, it might just be more helpful to remember that it's a lot like burning things. That in a car, you put fuel and oxygen. You might not think about the fact that oxygen goes into your car, but it does. Cars all have like this thing called oxygen intake manifold or something like that, but it brings in oxygen, brings in air. When you put the spark to the oxygen and fuel, you get a bunch of energy that is released, and carbon dioxide and water come out. This is the exhaust. In your body, you also put fuel, but the fuel isn't gasoline, now it's sugar. And you still get a bunch of energy that is released, and you still produce exhaust, right? You can't see the exhaust because usually it is invisible because it's a gas. But in this picture, in both of these pictures, you can see the exhaust because it's cold out, right? When it gets cold out, suddenly you can see the water coming out. You can't see the carbon dioxide coming out, but it's definitely there, right? And so this is an easy way to remember what cellular respiration is all about. It's about burning, but burning things very slowly using electrons in a multi-step process. Another way to help you remember, and that is way super small. I don't remember that being so small. So I'll maybe just zoom in on this for a second, if it will let me. It will not, of course, it will not. But the photosynthesis is the exact opposite of cellular respiration. Photosynthesis needs carbon dioxide and water, and that's exactly what comes out of your mouth. You are going to, or the plant then is going to take your carbon dioxide and water and make glucose and oxygen, and then that's going to come in to you, where then you're going to make the carbon dioxide and water, right? Like it just keeps going in this cycle, in this circle, over and over and over and over again. And it has been doing this since photosynthesis evolved about 2 billion years ago, right? So there you have it. This is called the carbon cycle, or the short carbon cycle, as you watch the carbon dioxide get turned into glucose, and then back into carbon dioxide, and then back into glucose over and over and over again.